Detroit Lions second-year safety Brandon Joseph is getting a lot of praise and making a lot of headlines throughout OTAs, whether it be for his top-tier play on the field or the high praise that he is receiving off the field from coaches and the media. Brandon Joseph seems to be primed for a strong second year and seems to be ready to take on a much larger role within the Detroit Lions defense this season. Now, Brandon Joseph is a second-year safety from the University of Notre Dame, an undrafted rookie free agent from the 2023 draft who had a strong preseason with the Detroit Lions, but due to the depth on the roster of CJ Gardner-Johnson, Brian Branch, Kirby Joseph, Ifeatu Melifonwu, he just wasn't quite able to stick on the final 53, but was a strong contributor to the practice squad all season. Now, Brandon Joseph is a 6'1", 192-pound safety for the Lions. A one-time All-American in 2019, spent 3 years with Northwestern, as well as his final collegiate season with Notre Dame, where he was looked at as one of the best safeties in college football. As a redshirt freshman at Northwestern, Brandon Joseph broke out onto the scene in his All-American year, having 46 total tackles, 1 tackle for loss, 6 interceptions, and 2 passes defended, while being one of the best ball-hawking safeties in football and making a name for himself early in his career. His sophomore season was not quite as good, but still a very strong season for a secondary member, where he had more tackles at 79, more tackles for loss at 1.5, only had 3 interceptions, but had more passes defended as well as a fumble recovery. So in his first season, he had 6 turnovers. His second season, he had 4 turnovers. So already 10 through his first 2 collegiate seasons. And then he followed it up with a junior campaign at Notre Dame, where he saw just 30 tackles, 1 interception, 1 touchdown, though, so the interception did go for a pick 6, 1 pass defended, as well as a forced fumble. So yet again, forcing 2 more turnovers on the defensive side of the ball for the Fighting Irish, as well as a defensive touchdown by himself. Now, despite the strong collegiate career and despite the amount of turnovers and the amount of praise that he saw from the media, despite the All-American nod and being one of the most turnover-prone players on the defensive side of the ball in America, Brandon Joseph went undrafted in 2023. He played very strong in the preseason, including a game-sealing interception in the Week 1 preseason game versus the New York Giants. However, despite his strong play in minicamp, despite his strong play throughout training camp, despite his strong play in the preseason, despite the game-winning interception, there was simply just too much depth for Brandon Joseph to make the active roster, because realistically, no matter how well he played, he was never going to beat out CJ Gardner-Johnson, was never going to beat out Ifeatu Melifonwu or Kirby Joseph or Brian Branch, meaning at best case scenario, Brandon Joseph would have been the 5th safety on the active roster. And unfortunately, 53 players does not leave you a whole lot of leeway when it comes to holding 5 safeties at a time. But that should not take away from how well Brandon Joseph played and how well Brandon Joseph assimilated to the NFL a season ago. Now moving into 2024, Brandon Joseph is continuing to make a name for himself. Brandon Joseph, throughout OTAs just this last Tuesday, picked off Jared Goff in 7-on-7 drills on a pass that was intended for Amon-Ra St. Brown in the end zone, meaning not only is Brandon Joseph playing some reps with the first team offense and the first team defense, it means that Brandon Joseph is being an impactful starter for the Detroit Lions in the absence of Kirby Joseph and Brian Branch not being available to play. That means Brandon Joseph gets that opportunity. And with the first team defense, Brandon Joseph is making plays, he's forcing turnovers, and he's doing what he does best, and that's getting hands on the football and giving the football back to the offense. Again, picking off Jared Goff in 7-on-7s on Tuesday's OTAs, and he's receiving a lot of high praise. The media seems very high on him, and when Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn talk about this kid, you can tell that there is just genuine infatuation with this player, and they want this guy to succeed, and they wanted him to get more time last year, but unfortunately just never really came to fruition. When you take a look at what Dan Campbell was saying about Brandon Joseph, he says he's kind of one of those, boy, You wish you could have gotten him up, though, talking about how last year they wish they could have gotten Brandon Joseph more playing time. He was called up twice last season to the active roster from the practice squad, did contribute on special teams, but never saw a defensive snap. And when asked about it last year, Dan Campbell said, hey, this is one of those guys that we wish we could have brought up, a guy that we wish we could have got more defensive snaps. And if it wasn't for, some of the depth that they had, if it wasn't for just how good and how deep they were at the secondary and the safety position, Brandon Joseph probably would have gotten more time, and he probably would have gotten some defensive reps last year to show what he was all about, because he impressed the coaching staff that much that as an undrafted rookie free agent, they were already thinking about ways to get this kid on the field and get this kid some playing time. Another quote from Dan Campbell says, "We say, all right, who developed? Who do we need to keep working with? Who's got room to grow?" And Bijo is one of those guys who noticeably improved last year. So despite not playing on the active roster, despite not playing in games, and despite not being and taking a defensive snap a season ago, Brandon Joseph still left a massive impression on the Detroit Lions coaching staff and throughout the entire season. We look at practices, we look at the practice squad, and Brandon Joseph seems to be one of the few players that the Detroit Lions really loved to keep around, and a player that they were looking time and time again, week after week, in finding different ways to utilize him. And unfortunately, it did not come true, right? With Brian Branch having a breakout season, with CJ Gardner-Johnson coming back at the end of the year, with Ifeatu Melifonwu breaking out, with Kirby Joseph continuing to be great, there just wasn't a spot for Brandon Joseph. And unfortunately, there just wasn't a spot for the undrafted rookie free agent to make his mark. But he sat in the background. He worked really hard. He improved. He developed. He got better. And now we're looking at Brandon Joseph as a player that potentially replaces CJ Gardner-Johnson as the third safety in this defense. And I think that Brandon Joseph is going to be the reason the Lions don't go out and sign another safety, why they don't go out and sign a Justin Simmons or sign a Quandre Diggs or sign an Eddie Jackson, or even go as far as to bring back Tracy Walker from a season ago, who was also a player that had to get playing time over Brandon Joseph a season ago. So with that being the case, I think all signs are pointing to Brandon Joseph having a really strong and very productive 2024. Is he going to be the primary starting safety? Probably not. Is he going to play more than 5 to 10 snaps a game? Probably not. But I would not be surprised if Brandon Joseph takes over as the third safety and the Lions feel comfortable enough with him to continue to play sets like they did in the playoffs, where Ifeatu Melifonwu, Kirby Joseph, Brian Branch, and CJ Gardner-Johnson were all on the field at the same time. I would not be surprised if they continue to run some of those defensive sets and some of those defensive alignments, because they have the confidence that Brandon Joseph can play the role well enough, which again leads the defense the opportunity to be more versatile. A defense now that can run those safety sets, but also has Terrion Arnold and Carlton Davis and Ennis Rakestraw Jr. and Emmanuel Mosley and Amik Robertson to lean back on, is a secondary that will be vastly improved from a season ago. And you take a look at the defense now, you take a look at the secondary, and yeah, it is significantly improved. But with the departure of CJ Gardner-Johnson, with that opening up of the safety position, and the Lions seemingly not even interested in addressing that depth, addressing that loss, I think speaks volumes to where they feel Brandon Joseph is, speaks volume as to what they think he can be. And I truly do believe that Brandon Joseph will take a massive step in year 2. You will probably see a lot of him in the preseason. I wouldn't be surprised if he started preseason games and played a large majority of them. And I think that we are going to see a big time season from Brandon Joseph in 2024. With all that being said, though, that is all I have for you guys today. That is kind of the update on the second year safety. Of course, down in the comments, let me know what you think about Brandon Joseph. He has been one of my favorite players since he entered the NFL. I am a big sucker for undrafted rookie defensive backs. I love Stephon Gilmore. I love Jerry Jacobs. I loved Brandon Joseph. Every single time we sign an undrafted rookie defensive back, he becomes one of my favorites and becomes a player that I love to root for. And in this case, it seems that Brandon Joseph may finally be getting his chance. But with all of that being said, let me know your opinions of Brandon Joseph down in the comments below. Let me know what you think about him as a player. Let me know how confident you'd feel of him getting playing time in 2024. Be very confident and very curious to hear what you guys have to say. But with all of that being said, that is all for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.